Commons are the building blocks of TCGs. They show that the more cards you collect, the more you can improve your deck, while teaching you fundamentals of the game along the way. This leads a lot of people to think that these cards are valueless. However, for the cards on this list, it couldn't be further from the case. So let's see which common cards might be hanging out in your collection that are worth more than you think, and why. Let's cover some criteria before we get started with the list. Any card is considered to be viable as long as it has a common printing and does not contain the text "cannot be used in a duel." I consider these as promotional merchandise and not as game pieces, so they are exempt from the list. The value is solely determined from the common printings. Cards with multiple printings only consider the highest value of the common printing. No DT cards, no Starfoil cards, no Shatterfoil cards are similar. I consider these to be parallel rares. They aren't really common cards. Some sites list them as common, but I think that's ridiculous. Some cards were consolidated if they were of similar value for similar reasons. We'll get into it as the list goes. For determining the value of the cards, I used TCG Player Market Price. This was double checked off of median and core TCG prices. If all the prices were rather similar, then that was the value of the card that I went with. Note that this is more of a snapshot and it is not really reflective of how expensive cards have been in the past. And it is also possible that these cards could lose value going forward, especially if the cards are only valuable because they're used in the current metagame. Would it really be a YouTube top 10 list if it didn't contain like a handful of honorable mentions? Historically, Vanity's Emptiness is the most expensive common printed in a main booster set, in a world dominated by Dragon Rulers. Many decks tried to incorporate this card as a way to halt this explosive deck before it swarms the board. This led it to ironically being incorporated into the Dragon Ruler deck itself to play Keep Away in the mirror match. Its play also didn't taper out after the initial banning of Dragon Ruler. At its worst, it was a sideboard staple throughout 2014, and in 2015 it became an incredibly oppressive floodgate in the Clifford deck. This finally culminated in needing it to be banned, and it has remained banned ever since. At its peak, Vanity's Emptiness was a $50 card. It was just that necessary in the game. Now it's only $1.50, but that's pretty respectable considering that it's been banned for so long. I struggle a lot with whether or not I wanted to put Droll and Lockbird at number 10 or the card that I put at number 10 at number 10. It's kind of a toss-up. They're valuable for very different reasons, so I kind of needed to make a decision there. In the end, I ended up going with Droll and Lockbird being an honorable mention. A side deck staple of several formats, since it's printing at Rare and Starstrike Blast, Droll was printed at common in a starter deck as a way to get more copies into players' hands. This is commonly known as reprinting, and it typically tanks the value of a card. However, Droll and Lockbird is still maintained a hefty price, hovering at around $6, and was a major selling point for the Order of the Spellcasters structure deck. Next is Dual Terminal preview cards. In the summer of 2009, the Dual Terminal was released to the TCG. A Dual Terminal, which is a mix of a vending machine and an arcade game, allowed you to play a minigame for $1, and then you get a card with a unique foiling. DT were available at several OTSs, regionals, and YCSs over the years. The trial run of the Dual Terminal had a set of 20 to 31 cards depending on the print run, and had an extremely limited amount. As a result, DTP cards are extremely expensive. So there are common versions of DT cards, like there are versions that have silver lettering, there are versions that have the ultra rare and super rare and secret rare letterings and foiling, but all DT cards have a particular foiling to them, which I think disqualifies them from being considered commons. However, on TCG Player, they are considered commons, and if that is the case, then they absolutely are the number one cards on this list. These cards are absurdly expensive. Harpy Lady 1, Crystal Beast, Sapphire Pegasus, and Buster Blader fall around $100, mostly for a mix of their collectible nature and their viability in their respective strategies. The final honorable mention goes to a McDonald's promo card called Flying Penguin. It's kind of hard to determine whether or not this card is actually worth $8 like it says on TCG Player. I'm getting a lot of like conflicting information off of eBay, off of Core TCG, and then off of other listings besides the market price. So I'm going to exclude it from the list, but it was considered. So without further ado, let's get cracking on the list. Rescue Cat was chosen because cats are natural predators of birds, so putting birds above it on the list seemed quite silly.
Okay, the crickets aren't even laughing.
Going into the history of Rescue Cat, it has been competitively viable since its original printing in Flaming Eternity. Initially, it was used in gimmicky OTK strategies centered around Last Will, Gyakugaier Panda, Mills' Radiant, and Des Wombat. Eventually, Last Will would be banned, severely crippling the cat, until a far less gimmicky OTK strategy emerged during the Synchro era. The eponymous Synchro Cat deck put out disturbing amounts of damage in a single turn while the opponent was helpless to respond, locked underneath Cold Wave. With several of the deck's key components limited or banned quickly after the deck's release, Rescue Cat found its home eventually in several new emerging decks. This included Gladiator Beasts with the introduction of Gladiator Beast Samnite and Flamvels, as well as forming the core component of several mid-rangey decks such as Caliber Cat and the OCG deck known as Equipment Cat. However, it was really in X-Sabers where the cat started getting out of hand, and with the introduction of XX-Saber Dark Soul, it finally reached a tipping point. The cat had been tumbling through the Forbidden and Limited list since Synchro Cat, but with the new combos emerging that enable you to discard your opponent's entire hand and add between 3 and 5 X-Saber monsters, the cat was finally deemed too powerful to be played in tournaments. It was forbidden in September of 2010. With its text permanently changed to balance the card, Rescue Cat was reintroduced to the game in 2016, finally being able to be used at 1 copy, and no longer posed any issues to the integrity of the game, leading it to be completely removed from the list in September of 2013. Today, you can use 3 copies of Rescue Cat. The cat still sees some fringe use, most notably in Crusadia, but it's no longer in the limelight of tournament success. Its use through the years lends it to being useful in several fan-made formats that are intended to replicate the yesteryears of the game. Rescue Cat is a key component of several decks, making it essential if you want to play these eras of Yu-Gi-Oh! This accounts for its price tag of about $6. The set Legendary Collection 2 introduced several GX staples in either upgraded rarities or downgraded rarities, to help players bling out their decks with new high-rarity versions of cards they already owned, or to print harder to find cards in a more accessible fashion. This set was insanely popular, so another similar set was released. This version contained packs that trimmed down on the original set of about 250 cards, down to just barely over 100 cards, and contained only the most sought after of those cards from the previous Legendary Collection. This particular version of the set, which featured the Raw Yellow Mega Packs, released the only common printing of Rainbow Neos. Although Rainbow Neos has seen very limited tournament success historically, with Protoplant, Verde, and Anaconda summoning, this card has become as easy as ever. All you need is any 2 effect monsters and the required fusion card and fusion materials in your deck or hand, and you can summon this card. With no recent printings, the card's foil printings are still sitting between $10 for the super rare and $90 for the ghost rare. Although the common is technically the least valued printing of the card, it still maintains value because the set is out of print. The card now sits at about $7, which is a high point considering up until this point, it really was never considered for competitive play. In fact, its only real value was because it was the fusion of 2 anime protagonist boss monsters, which gave it a point for collectability status, if nothing else. While Rescue Cat is a jack of all trades of retro formats, Metamorphosis is the master of one. Metamorphosis is an integral part of the 2005 Yu-Gi-Oh! Format known as Goat Control, or simply Goats. One of the defining plays of this format involves taking a goat token made off of scapegoats and turning it into a Thousand Ice Restrict, which would absolutely decimate any board that it entered, and would warp the entire game around it being removed. It was subsequently limited to 1 copy per deck in October of 2005, and Thousand Eyes Restrict was ultimately banned. This stunted the card's viability short term, resulting in it being allowed at 2 copies per deck. However, this was a huge mistake, as it then enabled powerful plays in the Demise OTK deck. Also troublesome with the newly released Destiny Hero Malicious, which created easy boss monsters with little effort. This ultimately led to its banning and has been banned ever since. The format is by far the most popular fan format. If you go to any regional, you will see people playing GOATs outside of their tournament matches. This has accounted for the card's increased price over time, and it now sits at $8. And it really isn't going to go anywhere but up unless they print the card in a new upcoming set. But it hasn't received a reprint in about 12 years. This is a bit more puzzling to see hovering around the $8 mark. It has absolutely zero applications in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh!, as it is completely outclassed by Mystic Shine Ball. This presents the last way commons can be valuable, which is scarcity and collectability. Happy Liver is only printed in the TCG as a common in Champion Pack 2, which was only available by attending events at local game stores between February and May of 2007. The chase cards in these sets tend to be super rares and ultra rares, and the commons are often thrown away or else are totally overlooked, leading to the card being hard to find. The second factor is its collectability, and as a card often used by Taya Gardner in the original anime, it has a niche among fans of the show. This also explains why cards such as Harpy, Amazonas, and Elemental Hero are among the most valuable of common cards. When a pointer was printed back in Stardust Overdrive, its effect was simply not impactful enough, and was completely outclassed by the extremely popular trap card, Trap Dust Shoot. Over the years, Dust Shoot has been banned, and the game has shifted away from longer, drawn-out games to games that are routinely decided within the first few turns. Discarding cards is also a quite uncommon effect, but it is an incredibly powerful effect. These changes over time created the perfect environment for a card like a pointer to see play. Although it was played in various Pendulum decks in 2006, it finally started seeing high levels of play in 2007 in the Zodiac deck. Now, with the game swinging more and more towards combo-based decks being the most powerful, it has become a consideration for all competitive players. Currently, the card is sitting firmly at $8, but with a super rare reprint coming up in an upcoming tournament pack, it is likely to see the price go down slightly, and the possibility of another printing would be likely. When I say Necroid Shaman here, I'm really referring to Dark Revelations 4, which is a pretty crazy set full of very expensive cards, particularly commons. Although Dark Revelations 4 was commercially released, it was exclusively available in the United States, and only as a part of the Light and Darkness Power Pack, which introduced the extremely powerful Light and Darkness Dragon to the TCG. As this product was the only way to obtain this powerful card, it flew off the shelves, and no additional printings of Dark Revelation 4 are available. These cards are notoriously hard to find and rarely come up for sale. What makes matters worse is that this is a reprint set, which means it contains almost 250 individual cards. Scarcity of the product combined with the massive variability in the cards you can get has led to this set having an absurd price tag for several cards. This is culminated in DR4 having about 40 cards with a price over $1. For comparison, most sets only have 1 or 2, and several sets have 0 commons over $1. The headliner among these commons are Elemental Hero Fusion's Necroid Shaman and Mariner. Both of these cards are close to $10. The other printings of these cards, also in common, are barely a quarter. Not like a quarter of the price, I mean like actually a quarter. You see this could be a Mariner. I don't know why it would be, but if you play the game even fractionally competitively, I'm sure you've anticipated this card being high on the list. For many players, buying Soulburner was a no-brainer. It included a competitively viable deck out of the box, and included one of the best pieces of interaction in the game. As the game has more and more centered upon consistency and being able to access what you need when you need it, most competitive decks include about 10 ways to add cards from deck to hand or special summon from the deck. Ash being able to counter this, importantly as early as turn 1, has led to it being playable since its introduction and has picked up more and more playability over the years. It is as close to an interactive staple as Mirror Force or Torrential Tribute were in the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh! If you play Yu-Gi-Oh, you should have a playset of Ashes handy, as they could be used in just about any deck, except for like the most dedicated of combo decks. As a result, like Ash Blossom has 6 or 7 printings, and none of them are less than $10. So as crazy as a $10 common is, there are some cards that are more expensive than $10. What 3 cards are topping the $10 mark? Look in your trade binder and see every card that is worth $15 or less. This common card is more expensive than all of them. At a whopping $17, it's kind of hard to fathom how Marvelous... Is that how you say it? Marvelous? 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 Who knows? Hard to fathom how this card is so expensive. It is only relatively unique as far as an instant fusion target, being the only level 4 wind or winged beast monster, but those are not particularly interesting traits historically as far as competitive success. In fact, the only cards this can summon are Harpy cards, which has led me to the conclusion that this is a Harpy card in disguise. It is used by My Valentine in some video games, and can be used alongside Harpies in some retro formats. Considering Instant Fusion is now limited and you can't really reliably summon this from the extra deck. This, coupled with its relative inaccessibility as only being released in packs given out at local tournaments, all seem likely factors to account for its price tag. But it is a real head scratcher to me as to how this card became so expensive. This card is from a reprint set, but ironically this card is much harder to find than the original copy, because Dark Beginnings 2 has a relatively short print run. What makes this card $17 is not scarcity, but its playability in the current format. Any deck using Isolde can easily put this card into the graveyard to summon a warrior from the deck. Used similarly to a pointer to pick apart the opponent's hand and prevent the opponent from comboing or breaking down the board once it has been established. There are a variety of decks that use this strategy, particularly the Infernoble deck. Similar to a pointer, this card also has a super reprint coming up, so it's likely this card is going to go down. However, $17 is a really crazy place to have a common be at, so it needed to kind of be encapsulated in time that we had a $17 card when we had no competitive events, and the card was only used in competitive decks. The number 1 card on our list, the culmination, most expensive common, is Hercules Beetle from Tournament Pack 1. By extension, this covers all cards in Tournament Pack 1 and Tournament Pack 2. This is extremely controversial, as I feel like now the title is misleading. Using my definition from the beginning of the video, the cards in these sets would take up the vast majority of the list. Initially, when I was crafting this video, I was worried about Dark Revelation 4 taking up too many spots, with 3 cards that could potentially displace the majority of the list. However, a list that used every valuable card from Tournament Pack 1 and 2 would have displaced every other card in the list except for Marvelous and Smoke Grenade. How boring would it have been for me to just callously list off these impossible to obtain cards monotonely, naming the price, then they're just extremely unlikely to be in your collection. How boring and how thoughtless, and how much easier a video would have been to make. Released in 2002, the fledgling player base would have not known about these packs unless they bought cards from a hobby store or knew of a tournament location, which is unlikely as most players purchase cards from less specified retail locations, such as grocery stores. It might be reasonable to assume that players would eventually seek out other players and go to hobby stores to get these packs, but that would take time, and time was definitely of the essence. Tournament Pack 1 was only available for a month before Tournament Pack 2 was released, and Tournament Pack 3 was released in spring of 2003, making these 2 packs only available for around about 4 months. It also didn't help that these cards were bad. They were significantly worse than cards in starter decks, so it was really unlikely any of these cards were ever played. This leads to most of these cards being forgotten. and are thrown out when the game no longer interests the new players. I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For about a decade, and I'm going to be honest, I've never seen a card from Tournament Pack 1. Like, not even in like a case or anything. These cards are just absurdly hard to find. Like, vendors won't bring them to events because there are nobody who buys these cards either. So it's just baffling to me that this is just even a part of the game, and it's not at all surprising that these cards are hideously expensive. The crown jewel of these unobtainable cards is Hercules Beetle, which sits at an incredibly high $27 price tag, and is without a doubt the most expensive common. So with that, that's our list. What are the takeaways? We can now kind of see how cards can maintain value even if they are common. If the card is viable in current formats, if it's viable in retro formats, if it's scarce, if it hasn't been reprinted in a while, if it has a unique effect, or it has a powerful effect. That would require knowing a bit about the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but there are plenty of resources that you can go to that can kind of inform you. So be sure to call through your collection and try and see if you have some of these bangers, and then, I don't know, just keep in mind some of the ways that these cards can be valuable. You never know with a common. It could just kind of spring up out of nowhere, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a crazy game, and it's worth hanging on to some of these cards. And that's all I got. Thank you.